Hey everyone, how exciting. This is finally taking off. I'm really excited. Welcome to this community conversation. If you're out there and you're listening in, please type in a number 1 so that we can see that you're joining us. But I'm really excited to be here today to share some good information with you, some valuable information to get us involved and even more engaged here in our neighborhood. Welcome to this community conversation. I really just want to take a few minutes to acknowledge what's happening here in our neighborhood. One is that it's really important today to acknowledge the land base that we're on. We are on the land of the Accomer O'odham and also home to the Pipash here in Salt River Pima Maricopa Indian community and the Lehigh community. So if you're not familiar, we are located within the boundaries, the tribal boundaries of the Salt River Pima Maricopa Indian community, and that's located just east of the 101 and north of Mesa area. But historically, what we do know as people living here is that this whole entire area was home to the Accomer O'odham, who are the people here in Salt River and Gila River. It stretched from the eastern Superstition Mountains all the way over to the White Tank Mountains. And so they took care of the land. They created the canal systems. They farmed. They did so many things to live here in this desert area. So this is home to the community. And so I just want to take a moment to acknowledge that land, to understand that that's one of the most important things that we do here, within our communities and our neighborhoods. I also want to acknowledge that my name is Debbie Nez. I'm a candidate running for Arizona House here in LD 26, also known as Legislative District 26. Within the legislative district, there is so many moving pieces. There's a complex system that's there. But in general, it includes the Salt River Pima Maricopa Indian Community, Districts 3 and 4 of Mesa, which is like the northwest area. And then it also includes a precinct, which is in South Phoenix. It's the Elwood precinct. And I think that when we think of those greater areas, there's also Tempe. So there's a lot of moving pieces there, but nonetheless, that makes up our district. We know that after this time, we're going to go through a redistricting process. So we don't quite know what that'll look like, but it's going to be really important for us to stay involved and stay engaged. I think the other thing, as a candidate, what's really important to know about me is that I couldn't be here without a lot of people, including my own family. So I'll take a moment to acknowledge my family. She sanjakin shle tetna bitni bashichin sitna jini dashiche kapahan dashinale she say to den yisidet na sha when the Salt River Indian Community shagan sha alchine tra Megan do Haley do Shandin dal yeah ado shast he Royce hold yeah the net shle I'm the grandchild of amazing grandparents. My grandfather on my mother's side was a rancher. My grandmother was a weaver of rugs. And so was my paternal grandmother, who spent time herding sheep, carding the wool, and using that wool to make things that she could either sell to feed her family. And then my paternal grandfather was a Navajo code talker. So I come from a really strong lineage of people who cared deeply for the places they live, the lifestyles they had, and I just want to extend my gratitude to my grandparents. If you don't know this already, at the age of 3, I had lost my mother. She comes up into what we categorize today as a missing and murdered Indigenous woman. She had been out looking for family and somewhere along the way went missing, and when found, she was found deceased and sexually assaulted, and continues to be a cold case today. And that story of my mother being the daughter of a missing mother has inspired me to do so much more today. But it really does inspire me to work very hard to ensure that we protect children, that we do what we can so that they can thrive in our communities and in our neighborhoods, in our school systems, and so that they can find careers that are meaningful. So as we get started here today, that's really important to share. I have two older brothers who have since, what we call in our culture, who have passed on. They've gone home. And so without parents and two brothers, I do have my family today. My three daughters, my beautiful daughters, Megan, Haley, and Shondine, and my husband, Royce. And together we share our blended family, and we have our grandkids with us. And so it's really beautiful, to come to you today to share who I am and all of the people that I represent. I didn't do all of this work alone, and I couldn't have done it without the support of my family to be a candidate today. So I just want to say thank you to my family, and then to say thank you to the voters for supporting me. We have spent the last couple of weeks, not actually, it's weeks at a time, making phone calls, texting, connecting to people in so many ways, providing the information we need to make sure that they are informed about the power of their vote. And I think that in the process of sharing what the power of our vote is, we had a lot of questions that came up. And I think for me, I've spent so much time, and I dedicated so much to learning about a very important part of our community, and that's the relationship of powers. And so during today's conversation, we're going to talk a little bit about that. We're going to make sure that we have a chance to learn what those relationship of powers are. And so we'll start with the federal powers. When we're talking about the federal powers, we think about the government, right? This sometimes can be seen as a huge entity that's constantly there, keeping an eye on what we're doing as local individuals. But when we think in general about the federal powers, they're responsible for printing money. They're responsible for establishing the military, ensuring that they create agreements. In history, we've known those as treaties with either the tribes or with foreign entities, but today, they're known as agreements among tribal or among entities. We also know that they regulate the interstate commerce. So there's a lot that's happening on a federal level. When we think about the state level, there's so much more to all of these moving pieces, and hopefully we can bring them back together again. But our state establishes the local government. They establish the local government, they issue licenses, they regulate the interstate commerce, they conduct elections. There's a lot of moving pieces there again. That's just in general terms, so things that we have to know. So that was the state powers. And now we're going to go ahead and talk about the local powers. When we think about the local powers, we think about public safety. So anytime we're on the freeways, if it's the 101, the Red Mountain Freeway, if it's, going into Phoenix to take care of business or Mesa, a lot of those public safety officers are there to ensure our safety. There's the fire department. There's so much more. And they also take care of the facilities. So there's a lot of different pieces to municipalities, if it's in Mesa, if it's in Scottsdale or Tempe, wherever it's at, there's so many different facilities there. And so the city takes care of many of those things. And it might include the water, it might include the utilities, the sewer, and along the way, they also have local roads. So if we think about some local roads that are really highly used, they're probably going to be like the McDowell roads or the Beeline Highway, or even in Tempe, some of the streets down along the ASU corridor. So if we think about Mill or University, some of those streets get used quite heavily. So when we think about local entities, these are the things that they're primarily in charge of. And those things might seem like they really don't have anything to do with us until we decide to use those roads. We might find ourselves caught in traffic, or maybe there's a need for a stop sign in a certain place, or there's a need for a speed bump to reduce or slow down traffic that might be going through. A lot of those fall back onto the local government. And when we think about the federal, state, and local, I don't know if you guys can hear that, but that's our dog trying to get inside. So if you hear that scratching, that's who it is. It's not a horror film. So we also have shared powers that we have here in the state. It includes the education system. So if we think about the Arizona Department of Education, they reach into all of the various pieces of our communities. They might be through the traditional K through 12. It might be charter schools. It might be some of the Montessori schools. But no matter what the district or county, all of these systems are shared among our state. And then we also think about those court systems that are there. We have court systems that address county issues with the sheriff. We have the state, traffic control. We also have corrections, things that affect our criminal activity that happens. There's so many different types of courts, and so those exist as well. And we think about the taxes. Taxes really support our systems as a whole here in the state. So these taxes might be used for education. They might be used to maintain roads, or it might be used to create buildings. And so when we think about these shared spaces, we also think about something that we don't always consider is highways, freeways. If we have a number of dollars that are set aside, they can be used to maintain or upgrade those roads. I also think about the fact that some of the shared powers are having to do with passing laws and regulations. So there's so many pieces that are there that we definitely we're just speaking on the surface about what has to happen. One of the most important, I guess I'll stop here briefly for a second. If you have questions, please submit those questions or those comments on our YouTube. We have a couple of viewers that are on, and we're really glad to help answer those questions. But as we're moving along, think about how this election, me as a candidate, if I secure the seat, what are the things that are going to be impacted? I want to think about that for a second. Is what if we secured that seat? What would change? How does it affect our powers on the federal, state, the local, and the shared powers? What would my role be, and how important it is? How important is that to tribal people? Too often we're not asking those deep dive questions, and it's really important that we ask those questions so that we can recognize how our vote really determines what's happening, but not just what's happening, but what the ramifications are. Who we vote for, what their values are, how does that impact who we are as people? I think that's really important. That's something that we don't have to have a lot of conversations about. Sometimes we might be protesting, well, we're not like the white people, or we're not those guys. That's not how we live. That might be true, but in my reality, I've found that when I cast my vote and I vote for something, or I speak out on something and I'm heard, it feels good. I feel acknowledged. And if the decision of a body or a group of people can take into consideration something I've said, even in a family setting, if my family asks me, Debbie, where do you want to eat, or where shall we eat today? And everybody's saying Mexican, pizza, spaghetti. and I say, you know what, I really want to eat here at home. Can I cook something here? And everybody agrees, yes, we can stay home. Well, I just voiced my opinion, it was heard, and I feel acknowledged as a person. But that can be the case if we are talking about, say, a business corridor and what's happening. Somebody wants to come and build something. And as individual citizens, if we say something about it, if there's a collective group, they all contribute ideas, that really is flexing our voice. And it's not any different than, flexing our vote. So that's something that I really want to think about today. What are the repercussions of a vote that we cast for someone? Or even if we decide not to vote, what are we doing? Are we giving that power to somebody? Are we giving more power to somebody else's vote to fuel something that maybe doesn't align with our values? That's really important to think about. So as we're moving on, I want you to think about those questions and feel free to submit them to the comments. And then when we pause here shortly, I'll come back and answer that. So we're going to move on to tribal powers. Wow, this is a really heavy one because too often, I think our as tribal people, we believe that the government has overtaken our land base. We know that history has told us that. But if we fast forward to 2020, there's a lot of issues here that if we're not involved in them, we lose out on so much. But let's talk a little bit about the tribal sovereignty. Tribal sovereignty is really hard to talk about because it's not something that we can touch. We know it's not tangible. We can't touch it, or we can't measure it. It's really difficult. So when as we have these conversations, it can be kind of confusing. So the younger you are, you might be kind of confused as well. I don't quite know what sovereignty is, but is it something that we're given, or is it something that we purchase? Is it something? And so we might have young people asking these questions, but in reality, it's not something we're given. It's considered something that's innate, that's a right to a group of people. And so in this case, we're talking about sovereignty as being a strong sense of feeling is what it is. We know what it is. We'd like to use that power when we have the chance, and when we can and we understand how to use it, we can collectively use that to really help ourselves and our communities. But essentially what the government defines it is it's a way to exercise our powers, our belief systems, our values, maybe about what we think or about what is happening. But over time, this idea of sovereignty has evolved. I mean, I think sovereignty was first mentioned when I went to college, and it's from Europe. It has that context and that kind of framework. But over time, here in the United States, we've used it in such a way that helps us build a relationship with the federal level, the state level, the local level. A lot of people have a much better understanding. And it's not always used the way we would like it to be used, but nonetheless, it's really important. I think that when we're thinking about those powers, we think, well, how do we use them? Well, we use them by regulating things that happen within a tribal jurisdiction. That might be the court systems, that might be services, that might be where we live or where we choose to live or where we build a home. Those are things that are really important, but there's no magic formula that tells you this is exactly how it is, because it's not. It's very complex. And even for me, it's when I have conversations with people, I always like to turn to experts, because we do have experts in the community who can help answer these questions. They study it, they work in these spaces where they have to deal with it all the time. And I think that's most important. And I think, we could say so much more about tribal powers, but when we think about all of these systems as a whole, we think about the federal, the state, the local powers, the shared powers, and the tribal powers. All of a sudden, we are no longer just concerned about who we are as an individual. All of a sudden, we have ties to different parts of our community. And for me, that's what I've really started to focus on is how can we leverage those relationships to help benefit our communities, our neighborhoods, our schools, our healthcare systems, our education systems. There's so many areas where we can leverage things that will benefit us in the long run. And I think for me, I started to really look at this because I have children. I have 3 daughters. I have a 22-year-old, I have a 16-year-old, and I have a 15-year-old. Their future is important to me. And, I shared earlier that my grandparents are no longer with me. My 2 older brothers are no longer with me. I still have family, extended family members, but my role as a parent is to empower my young children to look for these resources in the area, and how would they leverage them so that they can ensure that they're educated, so they can take care of themselves, so that they can build a career for themselves, so they can afford to live. I take my role as a parent very seriously, and so when I think about it, it's really important for me to understand who all of these shared powers. And again, if you have questions, please do submit those. Let me see if I see anything here. Let's take a couple of questions here. It looks like one question. What will you do to help ensure the safety of young girls and women? This is a very good question. This comes in light of understanding the missing and murdered Indigenous women. We have a group of legislators that came together and we're talking about this, and they have started working on the legislative bill. And over time, I found out about it, and I pursued that effort. And what I decided to do was to help pull grassroots women together to make sure that they were supporting these legislators. So it started out in committee hearings. It went into to testimonies, and then it went into the committee of the whole, voting. So much was happening, and so as pulling grassroots women together, we were able to build a coalition, and it helped. We were able to pass this bill unanimously in the House and the Senate, and that's something that's really important. So I'm glad that Haley asked this question, is what can we do to continue that? What's coming up right now, I've been working with the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women's Task Force. We're going to be coming up with a report. So you'll be able to see that in time. And I think that as we go forward, we're going to find out more about public safety issues. So that goes back to our local powers, and what can they do to improve their systems? Thank you for that question, Haley. We'll go to one more question here, and then we'll go back to our conversation about powers. This question comes from Kim Russell. Hi, Debbie. How are your ideas? What are your ideas to provide accessible, affordable, and safe housing to individuals and families? This question is really important to me because me being a citizen on the Navajo Nation, housing is one of the biggest challenges there, and it has to do with being able to have a land lease, being able to get everyone into agreement so you could build a home. So when I couldn't do that, when I turned 18, I decided to move here to Maricopa County. First of all, to find a job, to be able to make a living, to eventually get my education, and to be able to afford a house. Purchasing a house is no easy feat. It requires a lot of things, from making sure you have job security, making sure you're able to have a livable wage, and to identify down payments and what is needed. But what we want to do right now, and this is something that I've already started, I started working with Tempe and talking with them about affordable housing. There's a lot of federal grants that are available out there, and we have local experts that we can turn to and talk to them about it. And so when we turn to these experts, we work together with the municipalities. We find out what federal grants are available. Is there land or ways we can structure land or space so that it can be designated for, say, veterans or and it's usually broken down in a percentage. So there's this one location in Tempe, it's called the Valor. It's a apartment, there are apartments, so it's about 3 or 4 levels, and the top level is dedicated to say low-income families. The next level are for veterans. The next level is for maybe small families, and then the next level is a business, kind of a business floor where people can create stores, create a small business so that they can live affordably. So these are a lot of ideas that are already happening in Tempe. We can create more of that by working with experts in the community to make it possible. So I'm going to go back to a couple of things that I wanted to make sure I touch on. We're going to transition here to talking about the Democratic Party. We have about half hour to go, so if you have questions, please submit those so I can get to them. So the Democratic Party it's statewide. There's several layers. Again, we have the State Democratic Party, who also has their regions. They have legislative districts. They have counties. They have within those counties, they have precincts. So here in Legislative District 26, we have 34 precincts, and I live in the Honda precinct. And within the Honda precinct, it includes a geographic area, which includes the Lehigh community, includes the Salt River Pima Maricopa Indian community. The Salt River side is what I think I would call it. And then we have an area over where the retirement community is located. So when we think about this, every precinct has their own neighborhoods, and people can form and come together based on their values and support the ideas they have about our political system. There are groups that are focused just, say on women's issues, men's issues, but we all come back together to our county party meetings quarterly, and then we come together once a month at precinct committee meetings. And we do what we can to educate people. So this is something that was new to me when I first started. I started paying attention to it, and I caught wind that this was a precinct. And so I said, oh, this is interesting. I wonder what a precinct committee member does and who are they? So I searched and searched. I finally made my way over to the Democratic headquarters on Thomas and Central, and it was just in the news the other day. Sadly and unfortunately, the building was burned, and it burned. So they're in the midst of fundraising right now to get to figure out what they've got to do next. But that's where I went to start asking a lot of questions, asking, what is a precinct committee member? Is it something I can do, or can I help? And I did find out it's a volunteer opportunity where I can spend time in my precinct educating my neighbors, educating people who live in the area about when elections are coming up or what issues are on the Democratic platform. And it's taken me a while to figure that out, but nonetheless, I didn't give up. I just kept going forward. And as a precinct committee member, I was really excited. So here for Honda, we have 2 precinct committee members. We have myself, and then we have Royce. And then just recently, I worked really hard to recruit even more. I have a couple of precinct committee members, Claire Miller, who lives here in the tribal community, Mackenzie Doherty, and Megan LaRose. So you have 5 precinct committee members who live in Honda, and more are needed. We have a number of open spots. I want to say we have a total of 12 spots that are available, and we should fill all of those so that we can really begin to educate our neighbors about what the party platforms are, what can we do to empower ourselves. There's so much, and so but every month there's a meeting, every quarter there's a meeting for the county, and then there's also the state meeting, and often the state and the county meeting happen at the same time, usually back to back, but there are minutes so you can catch up or take a look at what's going on. and see for yourself. Their website is online, so you can search the Arizona Democratic Headquarters, and you can find information there. And it just starts by being curious, wondering who's who, what it is that they do, and how can we begin to move forward. So that's really important. And another part of the state and the county party is also the Democratic National Committee. And so the Democratic National Committee has responsibilities as well. They oversee the process of writing the party platform. They provide the national leadership on a national level. They are in charge of fundraising and creating the political activity that's needed. They also create the election strategy. So if we want to elect a new president, if there's more that we have to do, we work together with the party to do that. And on the other side of the party platform, we also have the Democratic National Committee. We also have the Republican National Committee, and that's really important. So these entities provide that they have oversight on a lot of things that are happening. They also have two other areas. Well, they actually have three areas. They have the presidential nomination process, and they have the two Hill committees, which is one is the House and one is the Senate. So when these bodies come together, all of them are carrying out duties and responsibilities that are very important. And I had probably the last 3 or 4 years, I've dedicated myself to learning this. And people sometimes ask me, why do you want to do this, Debbie? This is one, it's not our way. Two, that you're buying into this, to this idea. But really, for me, it's important. Again, it goes back to my 3 daughters, is this life that they have ahead of them. They're very young people, so they're all going to reach their 20s. They still have like 80 more years of life to live. And as a parent, that's the responsibility I have. As a citizen, as a tribal member, it's a responsibility I see as extremely important. And so that's why I dedicate my time to this. Let's take a real quick minute here to review. If we have some questions, I want to see who is out there. We have a question from Claire Hinckley. She says, I'm interested in tribal education issues, priorities, and challenges. And that is it's a big area. I keep saying that there's education can be broken down into several large categories. There's traditional K through 12, there's charter schools, there's private institutions, there's also, there's funding, discussions we can always have about that. We also have Head Start. We have higher education. We also, one of my favorite things is the fact that we can look toward unions as well. They have apprenticeship programs that we can work and learn more about. And so I appreciate those. I think that Claire, if you can help me define, one area, I can help answer that a little bit more, but I definitely want to help answer any questions that you have. Let's see here. Hey, here we have April. She's all the way from down south. She's saying, "Yeah, go Debbie." April is the chair for the Arizona Democratic Party's Native American Caucus, which is really important. April is from Donna Otham. She also sits with me on the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women's Study Task Force Committee. And she is fierce. Nobody can mess with April. She asks some of the really important questions, and she holds all of us accountable when it comes to maybe issues that are really difficult to understand, or if there's things that maybe our study committee hasn't considered. She holds us accountable in a really respectful way, sometimes making sure that she's passing along the grassroots message. And I think that we're all responsible in that way. So thank you so much, April, for joining us today. She also asked a question about having access to democracy in the form of representation matters to ensure our issues are front and center. I wished I lived in your LD so I could vote for you. Thank you so much, April. as I started out in this road to figuring out these shared powers, all these different levels, these municipalities, I had to lean on other people too. And April and Gabby from down south, who's running for recorder down there, they all come from a group. It's called Indivisible Tano. And Indivisible Tano has been really helpful in helping me understand what let me change the setting here. It has been really helpful in exposing me to groups, to the caucus, to the vision of what we could be doing in Indian country, how strong we could be, and it's women like this that I've Okay, guys, I'm back. Technology, it's unpredictable sometimes, but I'm back. I'm glad to be back. Let's see here. Are you still with me? Send me a 1 if you're still with me. So I want to go back to, what were we talking about? Oh, we were talking about Indivisible Tano and how they're they're really amazing in a sense that they empower all tribal people to come forward, and we all work together closely to ensure that we have information, that we understand how to communicate our positions, our thoughts, and to keep moving forward. So often, I don't know if I learned this from my grandma, but there's times where I would get really irate, and my emotions would be charged, and I would just want to get angry and upset. And I learned that doesn't work. That doesn't work, and I had to learn that in a way that was that it kind of, for me, I think was difficult. But when I started to work with Indivisible Tana, they helped me to realize how important it is that we maintain a degree of respect. We can have disagreement, we can have discourse, we can have differences without gaslighting, or without patronizing, or without humiliating the other person. We can communicate so that we get heard. And I love Indivisible Tana. They help me to see that. I think that's something that's been really valuable. So going back to my discussion on the relationship of powers, I think it's really important to understand those areas. Let me see where we're at now. So in going forward, I want to stress to our audience here that the census is another very important part of this system. If it's these shared powers, a lot of these shared powers use data to drive their information. They use data to create human service programs. They use data to build highways. They figure out a lot of different things, and so I wanted to talk about that briefly. But someone asked me one day, like, why do I have to fill out the census? This was a grandma that I ran into over at the powwow. She's like, why do we have to fill this out? They just want our information. They just want to use it against us. And I helped her to understand that that's not the intent. I said, as a young mother, when I was raising my daughter, I said, I had a job. I worked full time. I paid my rent. I paid for my vehicle. I paid for my insurance. I paid for food. And by the time I got paid for all of those things, I still didn't have enough money for, say, all the groceries I needed or to feed my child. So one of the most important things is that I needed infant formula. And so I used the women, infants, and children's funds to help purchase the infant formula that I needed to feed my children. And so some of the common things that the census data, the common things that what I'm trying to say is the largest program using census data to disperse funds is going to be the federal Pell Grant, something that's important to our students, to our youth, because as tribes, we're always reminding our children, you need to go to school, you need to figure out what you can do so you can take care of yourself. You've got to establish not just a job, but a career, something that will take care of you and your family. School lunch programs. So anytime we've ever sent our kids to school and they got breakfast or lunch, and if they were eligible for the reduced program, this is also where the data is used to distribute funds. Temporary assistance to needy families, Head Start, the child care assistance, the low income home energy assistance. So for our seniors, for our grandparents, Title I grants for education, highway planning. Anytime we are using a freeway or roadway over and over and over, there's wear and tear. So a lot of this funding might go to support the highways and the materials to rebuild those roads. We also have, if you live in the city, there might be housing programs that you qualify for. And so these housing programs can help to pay for maybe a down payment or maybe even Section 8 housing. So when a lot of natives move to urban areas and they want a house, they can do that through that local city and establish themselves. So when we talk about the census is really important for tribes. I believe here in Salt River the other day, we were talking about we're at 42% for families who have completed the census. We need to increase that way up because during this pandemic, the federal government dispersed tax relief or dispersed funds for unemployment or dispersed funds for to help our state. And I can guarantee you they use data to appropriate money for our state. But, they were probably using census data for this area, but we know that's 10 years old. We also know that there's a huge migration of families that move from either California or other parts, and they move here to the area. So the funding or the allocation that was given to this area probably was off in a big number. And so we want to make sure that we complete the census. That's really important. I think that these programs that use and disperse funds are valuable. They help with our healthcare plans. They help with so much more. I mean, there's a long list I can look and talk about. But as we begin to wrap up here, I want to go back to our questions to see what we have. Let's see, Megan. Megan, I'm interested in solving critical community issues as well. Will there be any internships or shadowing programs available to college students or community members? So Megan asks a very important question. That is important. When elected, I think that this is the most valuable experience, is to ensure that our college students have the opportunity to come and shadow, because one of the reasons, and there's a lot of reasons why I decided to run, but one of the reasons is to make sure that our young people, our tribal people, our brown people see somebody who looks like them and sounds like them within our decision making bodies. We need that. We need our young people to recognize this is possible. And so that's really important. I also had this, I had somebody who made a comment here, and let me find it. He said he was a PhD student and he wanted to help out in some way. I'm not sure where it's at, but we do want his help. I think it's important that our college students be involved because they can determine a lot of things. They bring so much value to the space because they can have meaningful conversation as well. It's not just a legislator. As a citizen being at the Capitol, I was able to have meaningful conversation with legislators, especially if they weren't familiar with tribes or tribal reservations or having to live on it for a while or being present there. I think that's one of the biggest questions for our college students. Here's another question from Kenzie. Hello, I'm a first-time voter in the primary, and I want to get a better understanding about you and the people I'm voting for. What advice can you give me? So this is a good question. I think, to get to know legislators or people within the party systems, if it does, we have to get to know each side because we have to understand the values. Not everyone will agree with that statement, but when you're a legislator, your primary job is to listen to people. It's to have conversations. It's to have civil discourse. It's to understand we have differences, but how can we get to the next level together? We may not always agree, but nonetheless, we still have to take that time to listen. It's something our grandma has always taught us, be respectful to each other. When you're out there, don't ignore or help one another. Those are teachings that we have had for the longest time with our grandparents. Here's another question from, how has Salt River Pima Maricopa Indian community impacted the adjacent communities, cities in terms of economic development? This is a really important question. I think, a citizen of the Navajo Nation, I come from a really small, remote area. There's not a lot of economic development in the town I come from, which is Klagetoh. There's a small trading post there. It has a gas pump. It has running water. And there's a chapter house. There's a volunteer fire department there. Been, for as long as I've known, it's been a volunteer, even since I was a kid, and I'm almost 50 right now. And coming from a small town like that to here in Salt River, I think when I think about Indian country, Salt River Indian community is one of the most progressive tribes in Arizona. The opportunities they have because they created an established business corridor. They have a number of enterprises here. And they work really closely with the cities. They work with Mesa, Tempe, and they also work with City of Scottsdale in different ways. If it's either tourism or, healthy activities, social activities, there's a lot of opportunities for them to come together. So when it comes to economic development, everybody is supporting one another. We are systems and we're heavily dependent on one another. If it's, getting, I think when it comes to employees with the casino and gaming industry, I want to say there's probably 1,000 to 2,000 employees there. And I recall having conversations at some earlier events and finding out that there were 78 languages spoken within the gaming industry. So that tells me a lot about the relationship with people who live nearby and who work, within the tribal gaming. That's pretty impressive. So the economic development there is really strong. There's so much more, I think, that is happening that we may or may not be aware of, but nonetheless, they're really important. What can neighboring cities learn from Salt River? Oh my gosh, there's a lot of different things. I think one important, I think for me personally, is the understanding that we could create housing opportunities for tribal members, especially if there's limited housing here within the tribe. We might have families who come together in shared spaces, and that's usually normal for us. We invite families to live in our homes because that's the way we've been taught. You take care of each other. But what if the person who's living there would like a place of their own? You know, how do they do that if there's not a housing opportunity here that they can take advantage of? So how do they do that within the city? And if there are barriers there, if it's financial or if it's if it's even background, you know, sometimes you have to fill out an application, and if you have something on your background, if it's credit or related to previous history, criminal history or something, we have to find ways to house people. We can't just dismiss them because they have something in their background. We have to find ways to support our families and our relatives who are needing a home. I think that's really important to talk with the cities about. Let me see if there's any more question here. Okay. So I think that wraps it up for those questions. And let's go ahead and move over to our call to action today. So our call to action today is really going to be about, I'm asking you to hold me accountable. I'm asking you to consider, you know, the challenges that are before us. And the reason why I decided to run is because I want to hold my legislators accountable. I want them to know that I'm here and that I care about my community. I care about our education systems. I care about the homeless, you know, who are without a home. Or I care about how funding is allocated, so it's not just within the prison system and going into somebody's pockets, that it's actually fueling our economy through the education process for our young people. I want to make sure that we create opportunities for our social workers to be helping in schools. As a social worker, I've seen so much. I've seen students who deal with mental illness that often leads to depression and often leads to self-harm, and young people trying to take their lives. I've seen our elders go without a lot of services, and it's important that we begin to make those connections, that we begin to understand what's important for our young people and our elders, who happen to be the most vulnerable populations that we have. And I think that going forward, there's just so many different things. I can't just say this is all I'm going to work on. I think there's plenty of opportunities there to speak to people. And so I'm asking you to vote. Tuesday, August 4th is election day. Take a few minutes, practice safe and social distancing, take your gloves, take your mask, and go and vote. Second is, I want you to continue to hold me accountable. Hold me accountable in such a way that you're asking questions and you're working with me to ensure that we meet goals, that we identify goals, we set up a time frame so that we can accomplish these things, and that we use ways to measure our progress. I think here in our district, that's something that I haven't been able to see, and I struggle with that, and there's nothing wrong with that. It just means that I have meaningful conversations with our community leaders to ensure that we're doing really well. As we go forward, I want to make sure that we plan for what's ahead. There's so much that's going to be coming up. In about 3 weeks, I've been elected to a very important role within our state, actually on the national level. And it's a duty I'm excited about carrying and following through. I'm also elected to 2 boards. I am a board member on the Arizona Humanities and also a board member for First Things First. These roles are very important to our community. So there's always going to be something that comes up. So I really do encourage you to have meaningful conversation with me. Ask me. Give me a time limit so I can make sure I'm writing due dates, when to check back with you, when to circle back with you. I think that's really important. If there's no other questions, I really enjoyed this conversation. I know that I've answered some of the questions, and if I didn't get to your question, please do submit by email to Debbie, Debbie, at debbieforarizona.com. Again, that's Debbie at debbieforarizona.com. I believe I have that here. There we go. There's the website. So please do reach out to me. You can find more information on my website as well, and follow me on social media if you don't have that information. I believe it's on Facebook, it's at Debbie for Arizona House, and on Twitter, it's at Deb_Manuel, and also on Instagram. And we are looking for volunteers. We have, once we are able to secure the seat in the primary, we are still going to have to move forward to the general election, where we go, where the two individuals from the Democratic Party go against the Republican seat. So we want to make sure that we turn out this vote. If you are not registered to vote, please do sign up with the voter registration for the general election. It's free. It doesn't cost us anything. So please do take advantage of that. And if there's nothing else, I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for joining us. And we will do a quick survey to find out when we should schedule our next community conversation. This was really important. So thank you. Yeah, and Thank you in a very big way. Thank you. Have a good night, everyone.